Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on Big Blue View Radio. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel here on YouTube. All right, as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft, we know all of the discussion around the Giants centers around what they're going to do at quarterback and whether they're going to take somebody in the upcoming draft here in April. And here to help me today is the man with all the answers all the time, Emory Hunt of Football Game Plan and CBS Sports, good friend of the show. Emma, how you doing?
Doing fine, Ed, man. As you know, it's middle of travel season and middle of putting together this draft guide that's probably going to be massive once again because of all the people that are. I think we're finally done with the COVID years, and so this is the last crop of COVID guys that we'll have. So we should get back to normalcy a little bit.
I was going to say, do you even know what state you're in at this point?
Right, right, exactly, man. Like it's been in and out of Jersey at one All Star game, this one, that one, bro. It's been all over. It's been crazy.
And we'll get into all of that. You've been at all of the small all-star games. You've been at the FCS Bowl, the Hula Bowl, College Gridiron Showcase, Tropical Bowl. You've been at all of those at this point. Am I right?
Right. So when people, if you see someone say draft season starts this week at the Shrine Bowl, they are lying to you. They are not about this life because NFL draft season never stops, and especially starts with these All Star games, the FCS Bowl, which is in December.
No, no, no. Come on. Draft season starts the day that Mel Kiper releases his first mock draft. Come on, that's when draft season starts for people. And I'm laughing and I'm bringing that up because as we record today happens to be the day that Kiper did release his first mock draft, and of course everybody goes berserk when Mel does that. And I actually thought, all kidding aside, I thought that it would be a decent place to start for you and I today because Kuiper selected the man who, in your words, is the Black Joe Burrow for the New York Giants, that being Shadur Sanders. And Kuiper, in his explanation, he called that selection of Sanders without having to move in the draft, able to get him at 3. He said that is the best case scenario for the New York Giants in the upcoming draft. And I see you shaking your head because you know where I'm going. I'm going to
Mhm.
ask you if, in your mind, that is the absolute best case scenario for the Giants is to land Sanders without having to trade up for him in this draft.
Absolutely, because we all know the wild card in this situation is Cleveland sitting right there at number 2. Yes, they do need a quarterback, but we know the financials can make that decision a little tricky for Cleveland. And what makes it tougher for the Giants is that let's say Cleveland doesn't want to go quarterback, but they also don't want to pick at number 2. So now you look behind Cleveland at the Raiders, at maybe any other team that wants to trade up to 2 and get Shadur Sanders. That's why it's an ideal situation for the Giants in that mock draft that Sanders fell to 3 because the Giants more than likely will have to get up at that 2 spot just to make sure they don't run into any hiccups with, someone trading with Cleveland to get to number 2 to take Sanders. Because if that happens, now we're going to have to start to talk about contingency plans for the Giants in terms of the quarterback position. Because again, I do like Jalen Milrow, but there's a chance for the Giants to have their cake and eat it too. If that's the road they want to go down, and they're going to have to probably get back into round 1 to get Milrow and come away with 2 first-round picks like they did in 2018. But if they're able to get Sanders or Ward at 3, that's a great fit for New York Giants fans.
Let me see if you agree with this. I've been looking at the Cleveland situation. I've been talking to some Cleveland people, and they're kind of looking forward to the idea of we're sitting there and we know the Giants want a quarterback. We know the Raiders want a quarterback. We know the Jets might want a quarterback. We know there are other teams behind the Browns, behind the Giants that might want a quarterback. You know the situation with the Giants. Joe Shane, Brian Daboll back for a 4th year. A lot of people didn't think they deserved that 4th year. A lot of pressure on them with a really tough schedule, what looks like a tough schedule, to produce a product that looks representative in 2025, that looks like it has a future. The way that the last off season went, I I feel like the absolute worst case, the worst thing that can happen for Joe Shane is to sit there at number 3 and watch the Raiders or the Jets, especially the Jets in New York City, trade past him to go get Shadur Sanders and then have Shadur Sanders become a star. I think that's the worst case scenario, and I honestly think it puts pressure on Joe to make that move and make sure that Sanders in particular, because I think Ward's going to go to Tennessee, but just to make sure that one of those two guys doesn't get past him.
Yeah, you gotta have to make sure you ensure that if you're Joe Shane, and I think what has to happen is now we're gonna have to look at Joe Shane perhaps starting to put together a couple of different packages. Some that may include future first round picks, some that may include future first round picks or future first round pick and also a player or multiple picks in subsequent drafts, whether it's a first, two twos, or whatever the case may be, and try to because he knows Cleveland knows that they need a quarterback like you laid out, and they know that Cleveland knows the desperation is going to drive the price up for that specific team. Like the Browns could potentially take less from another team because they can, but they know the Giants are desperate, so they can really upcharge them even more so. And if you're Joe Shane, if you trust your ability to evaluate talent, to nail the day 3 portion of the draft, and also undrafted free agents, then you shouldn't have a problem giving up high leverage picks to go get the one guy that you feel as though, hey, this is going to help our football team beyond my years here in New York City, New York, New Jersey area. So if that's the case, then there's no price you can't pay outside of a Mike Ditka, Ricky Williams deal
Mhm.
that isn't a that's a that won't be enough to go get your guy, especially at that position, because we've seen the
Yeah.
Rams do it, and the reason why the Rams have been able to do that is because they excel on day 3 and the undrafted rookie free agents, and if you're able to get that, you can give up a couple of first round picks, and it won't hurt you because you're well coached, you're great at evaluating day 3 talent that can help you right away, and you can fill in spots with free agent dollars because you're not spending that high amount of money on top first round picks.
The one thing that I would hesitate to see the Giants do, and I messed around with the trade charts recently because there was a mock draft, I think, from the Draft Network, where the Giants gave up their first 3 picks in this year's draft and a second round pick next year to move up to get one of those guys. And and I don't know, that just seems like a lot to me, is not is to give up your entire day 2. But maybe that's what you have to do.
Yeah, and think about it. If you're able to do that, I think that you're getting off easy because you don't have to give up a first round pick next year. You just swapping picks. You go up one spot, you give up day 2, but you really have to trust your scouts, lean on your scouts to nail day 3, and whatever the Giants cap situation is, now you can use what you already have on the roster, plus the addition of the Shador Sanders or the Cam Ward, and say to free agents like, "Hey, we got a guy that players talk and players watch college football as well. They know both of these dudes can play. They know both of these dudes are difference makers. So that is more attractive to come and grab those free agents. Would kind of help supplement your loss of those day 2 picks."
Do you agree with me that, we talked about the Giants just really, from the perspective of Joe Shane and the way people saw Hard Knocks last year, and losing Saquon and then going 3-14 and all of that. I think it would be really hard for people to stomach watching Shane sit there at 3 and letting the Raiders or the Jets or somebody go past him. But do you also agree with the fact that getting that quarterback, whether it's Shadur or whether it's Cam Ward, if Ward happens to go after Shadur Sanders, that sort of helps the Giants change that narrative and change that, everybody's still kind of snickering at the Giants because getting that quarterback maybe gives them hope and maybe changes the narrative a little bit and maybe it gives Shane and Dable a lifeline too. I don't know, but I almost think it's kind of a the more I think about it, it's kind of a necessity.
I believe so. And what I feel like, I don't want to speak for all Giants fans, but I'll say this. I think Giants fans want to see some sort of confident direction from Joe Shane. So this is what we're gonna do, and this is what it costs. We're gonna get this guy, and we're gonna build this way. We're gonna look. Our football team is gonna look like this. That's all Giants fans want to see. They want to see someone with some conviction. As much as people talked about Dave Gettleman, at least they felt like he had conviction in what he did and why he did it. They want to see Joe Shane. They don't want to see what we saw on Hard Knocks, where he kind of looked like he didn't really was confident in a decision he made. And so that's how you lose your Saquon Barkley and other free agents. They want to say, hey, this is what it costs to get this guy. Okay, we're going to pay this for this guy, but then we're going to also go and grab this guy. And we like this guy. They want to see somebody that knows which way they're going and not hoping they're going in the right direction.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Joe knows where he wants to go. I think he kind of knew that the Barkley thing would be unpopular. It's I've never felt like Joe wanted to build around a running back, but we can argue and Saquon is embarrassing the Giants. There's no doubt about that. Saquon is embarrassing the Giants, which was always possible. I still think you can argue that in a vacuum that the decision to move on from Saquon is defendable. You know, I still think you can argue that, and Joe will sit there and point out, well, we actually ran the ball better this year than we did last year with Saquon, and he'll point out, well, we got good production out of a fifth round pick who's making a lot less money, but they went 3-14, and they lost the player around whom their franchise was built, and I think Joe, if he as he looks in the mirror, and I've said this a bunch of times at Big Blue View, I think he needs to look in the mirror and realize they're not just chess pieces; they're people, and they affect each other. And I think the Giants have lost too much leadership over the last couple of years, and Saquon was the biggest piece of that.
They lost too much talent. And talent wins you games. Think about Cincinnati. You know, losing Mixon hurt them this year. But what we have seen them do is make sure they surround Joe Burrow with first it was Tyler Boyd, and he was a little bit there before Burrow. But you have Boyd, you have Chase, you have Higgins. They went out and got Gasicki, who fit. They had Mixon last year before they got Gasicki. But here's the thing: the Giants have had so much mass exodus of talent. McKinney, Julian Love, Saquon. They ran Odell out of here. Not this regime, but the Odell was run out. Ingram, couldn't work through his drops and was able to find new life in Jacksonville. You just ran through some good players. And if you're gonna get a Shador Sanders, you want to make sure you keep your best players and you cultivate an environment of we're trying to win. We'll figure this cap thing out because for whatever reason, people only worry about the cap on paper. In practice, people just make moves. Like I know everybody brings up the Saints, but they are the shining example of who knows what the cap is, right? But they always seem to sign somebody and extend somebody. Yeah, they may be kicking the can down the road, and they're gonna the roost is gonna come, the chicken's gonna come to roost at some point for them, and maybe they can't sign as many guys, or they're gonna have to excel at the draft. But I think Giants fans want to see a team that's talented. Even if that doesn't mean they go 16 or 17-0, but if they can just go out there and be competitive and have a shot and look like the Bengals in terms of like, yeah, they may have started 4-8, but they turned it on late. They're excited to watch. That's what they want to see. They want to have that hope. And right now, with the mass exodus of talent based off some binary numbers on a stat sheet or on a spreadsheet, that's not enticing fans to want to come and watch the game.
Yeah, and I do think needing that hope, needing to give the fan base. I mean, you can't go through another year of planes flying over the stadium, with signs directed at John Mara. You just can't do that. Maybe that is also part of the reason why, people you talk about, well, maybe they can get a guy on day 2 who might be a long-term guy. Maybe it's Milrow, like you've talked about. But that's not necessarily gonna give people the hope that grabbing a guy in the top 3 would give them, and I think that the Giants might be in that situation where they just need that injection at this point.
And not just grabbing a guy in the top 3, but grabbing a guy that is universally thought of as good. Like, when they took Daniel Jones, it was maybe like 10% of the population that thought Daniel Jones was a good player, and that just didn't inspire, even though he was a first round pick, that didn't inspire the fan base. But a guy that's universally thought of as good, like a Caleb Williams, like a Jayden Daniels, those guys kinda, "Oh, we got something," and we saw how that played out for Washington. Didn't work out for Chicago in the first year, but that hope was there for Chicago, and that's all Chicago Bear fans wanted to feel like they got a shot, right? And that's
Right.
what the Giants fans want, someone that everybody thinks is good, like, "Man, the Giants got a good one." That's what they
Mhm.
want, and that's what represents Ward and, Shedeur Sanders in this draft class.
Absolutely. And let's move on from quarterback a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about the smaller all-star games that you've already been to. You talked a lot about if the Giants are to have to trade up, whether it's up to 1 or up to 2, they're gonna have to give up a decent portion of their draft class. They're going to have to nail the later picks in the draft. They're going to have to nail undrafted free agency. They're going to have to nail veteran free agency if they're really going to improve this team. And that is a really good segue into some of these smaller all-star games. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here before we get into certain players and positions and all of that. But some of the guys that you saw in these 4 all-star games will show up in the Shrine Bowl and will show up in the Senior Bowl, correct? Some of these guys probably got invited, based on their work in those games, correct?
Correct. You saw a couple call ups from one to from the Hula Bowl to the Shrine, and also from the Hula Bowl to the Senior Bowl. So you've seen call ups already.
Mhm. And let's talk about, the Giants, they could probably you could argue that they could use infusions of talent everywhere along the roster. But we can probably specifically talk about offensive line, defensive line, defensive backs, maybe particularly, corner, excuse me. Maybe, somewhere down the road, they're probably, especially if they lose Darius Slayton, they need to add at wide receiver. But I'm curious if there are a handful of guys, maybe from a Giants perspective, that you saw in those all-star games that you just want to tell people to pay attention to.
It was great about going to these smaller All Star games. Ed, is not only do you see the talent, and a lot of the talent up until, let's say, the Shrine Bowl will be guys that'll be day 3 to undrafted rookie free agents, right? So guys that we'll see go in the 6th or 7th round, or just day 3 in general, but also guys that will end up in the rookie tryout camp or the 90-man training camp roster, right? So this is where you kind of see those guys. And what's also cool about that is to see the teams that are there now. All 32 teams have been represented. All 9 CFL teams, 8 UFL teams. I've seen some European League of Football teams there. I've even seen WWE scouts, talent scouts there. To think about it, like, they had 2
Yeah.
guys from last year that went straight from the College Gridiron Showcase into WWE. So it makes sense, right? Get high level athletes that are still athletic. Um, and so, but what also has been fascinating to see, and this is something that I really started to pay attention to, I want to say 3 years ago, is to see the teams who send multiple scouts down. Giants are one of them, where
Mhm.
you've seen 4 to 5 scouts at an all-star event. And so that kinda helps them, especially because a lot of these games tend to have a lot of numbers.
Right.
They bring in a lot of guys, so it makes sense to have multiple eyes at practice. Hey, you watch the O line, you focus on the running backs, you focus on receivers because that's a large group, and so on and so forth. So it's been cool to see the Giants send multiple scouts to these All Star games. So with all of that being said, looking at, let's say, cornerback Carlin Vigors out of UL Monroe, I thought had a really good Hula Bowl week. But 6 feet, a little bit over 6 feet, about 190. Technically sound, long, athletic. I watched his game during the season because UL Monroe had a really good start to their season, and I watched their game versus Texas. And you saw the receivers that Texas has, and Carlin had a great game in that one. I'm surprised he hadn't gotten called up yet to the Shrine or Senior, but we know things can happen later in the process too. So he was outstanding to watch. Number one, and talk about in terms of, let's say, offensive line, defensive line. I would say from a defensive line perspective, Ricky Barber, defensive tackle out of UCF. Now, people will look at his height, say he was 6 feet or a little bit under that, maybe 5'11", um, you know, in a quarter. But at the end of the day, you watch how Puna Ford plays, and you watch how disruptive this guy was. Barber was super disruptive from start to finish. And let's say from a Giants perspective as well, I look at rotational depth at edge rusher, waves of guys. You got to have waves of guys to come in and get to the quarterback. DeJuan Black, who started his career at Florida, transferred to Temple and played a little bit there. He was at the Tropical Bowl this past weekend. When I say there was two plays in a consecutive fashion during the last practice before the game. One would have been a sack that he got back there quick off the ball. The second play, he blew up the running back. Like he came off his own read and just boom. It was one of where everybody was, like, even people that was watching, like, oh, one of those type plays. And
Mhm.
then in the game, in a torrential downpour, I called the game. He had 2 sacks in that game and a couple of TFLs as well. So he's 6'4", about 230, long, lanky athleticism. And you see stuff like that. You say, okay, that's a guy, maybe day 3 undrafted guy that has some work withable tools and traits that can come in and help you out. And so when you think about what the Giants need, maybe at another a defensive back, I thought Kenny Gallup out of Howard, was outstanding. He is he and he is someone that he's about 5'10", 210, and he's rocked up, but he's explosive. They had him playing corner at the College Gridiron Showcase to showcase his, how can he cover. But I've seen him at safety. I actually called their spring game last year and noted in their game this year against Morgan State. So I've seen Kenny Gallup live twice, and watching how active he is in the run game, it's almost like having another linebacker. Remember how they tried to move, or they want to suggest to move um, for what's the guy's name from Alabama that the Giants got?
Landon Collins.
Landon Collins. They wanted to move him to linebacker. Well, Gallup can play that nickel backer that's now in vogue, and he plays it rather well. He is a monster in the run game, and he closes well in the pass game. So there was a bunch of guys. Offensive linemen at that level is still kind of hit or miss. So you still kind of want to see certain guys, and maybe those are guys that end up as the UDFAs that come in the 90 camp. So
Mhm.
you don't see the top tier level of offensive linemen until you get to the Shrine and Senior. But there's a bunch of these work withable tools guys that you kind of get traits on. You see them like marking down notes. And there was this kid, I forget his name, um, but from FAU, Florida Atlantic. I could tell you right now because it was in my article. But this was a guy that came in 6'4", two like 300 pounds. I'm gonna tell you right now as I pull it up. His name is Malcolm Lamar Sr., 6'4", 318. But get this, Ed, 86-inch wingspan. And so you see someone like that, and then you watch him in one-on-ones, and you can understand why the defensive players can't get back there because he has the long arms to really reach out and touch you right away,
Mhm.
and does a great job in keeping that at bay. But those type of things you notice at these
Mhm.
All-Star games, like, man, why did they take a shot on this guy in the 7th round of FAU? I didn't hear about him. Well, this is why. 86-inch
Mhm.
wingspan. They saw him at practice, saw him up close, and he was dominating. So those things you get to
Mhm.
notice when you go to these all-star events.
Yeah, it's so the Giants need an undrafted free agent class full of Elijah Chapmans is what they need.
Right, exactly. Bingo. Think about how he made the impact out there. And there's a couple of like obviously Ed, my mind is spinning. There's a bunch of guys that check this height weight. You walk up on a guy. Um, there was an edge rusher. I'll find his name afterwards, but there's an edge rusher that was out there at the College Gridiron Showcase from the University of Montana that he's a Canadian guy, so he's probably gonna get drafted in the Canadian draft. But the Giants have had a history of bringing guys from the CF that have been drafted in the CFL draft. They bring them to minicamp. I've seen that a bunch of times. This dude
Mhm,
was legit 6'5", 6'6", long, kind of looks like Ellerson Smith in terms of how
mhm.
long he is. So you think, and I wish the NFL was a true developmental league. I really took development seriously because that's a guy you can't coach that length and athleticism and the quickness off the ball. You gotta want them in your building. So when you
Mhm.
see stuff like that, that's where the scouts are like, okay, if we can just kind of stash this guy for a year, he could be something that can help us out at least in rotation.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, and I wasn't gonna bring this up, wasn't really gonna talk about this, but you said you wish the NFL was a true developmental league, and for me, that is something I have tried to tell people for a long time. It really is not.
Right.
If you see a player, if you're looking at a cornerback, for example, and he's not a good tackler at the college level, he's not gonna be a good tackler at the NFL level.
Mhm.
If he generally is an offensive player who's careless with the ball, he's probably gonna be careless with the ball in the NFL. The the thing about the NFL is the NFL doesn't have very much time for backup players. It
Nope.
just doesn't. There's very little practice time now thanks to the CBA, and these in-season practices are all geared toward next week's opponent. They're and all these quote unquote developmental practice squad guys do is stand around and watch or walk around and pretend to be defensive players or offensive players lined up in, to give the other guys reps against the
Mhm.
looks that they're going to see. These guys development at the professional football level and development happens in the off season if players want to make it happen. That's the way that I see it. It doesn't happen, once OTAs or training camp start or any of that. It happens when players work on their own.
Right, because at the end of the day, when we've seen this at training camp where I mean, think about how long we've seen David Stills in training camp, right?
Right.
And what has that manifested itself into for him? A couple of spot starts or whatnot, a couple of spot opportunities here, but that's someone that has been on that roster, but hasn't really got a true opportunity. And if you don't use it, you lose it. And for the NFL, to their credit, they have the luxury of just scraping off the top. They don't have to really worry about development. They're getting to pick the best of the best every year. And so it's where development could help the NFL is when you get that guy that may be 6'4", 230. It's like, okay, can we get him in an NFL locker room to really work with our strength and conditioning program? And maybe next off season when he comes into camp, he's 245.
And then
And
he's ready.
then
Yeah.
he's ready to go. That's where because some of these guys, if you're not coming from the Power 4 program, physically you are not ready. You don't have the
Mhm.
access to the nutrition table and the weights that these bigger schools have. But if you got the raw athleticism and you are able to get a full year of just straight pro strength and conditioning nutrition, man, you're going to develop fast. And now your skills can match what your potential is. And that's where the NFL really has to kind of shrink that gap between bringing guys in and getting guys up to speed.
Let me ask you this. College football's not what it used to be, obviously, this year with the extended playoff, the longer season, the NIL money, all that stuff. But I'm looking at the draft process and I'm looking at all these all-star showcase games, and now we're headed to the big ones, the Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl, and then we're headed
Mhm.
to the combine, and then we're headed to pro days. But now you've got players who have played 15, 16, 17 games instead of playing 12.
Right.
Is that going to impact what these players and their agents are going to be willing to let these kids do physically? Is it going to impact, how teams are going to have to grade and judge these players? Are they not going to be able to, to demand that they go to 15 different, 30 visits and work out 15 times for teams and all of that?
Ed, that is a great observation and great question. I brought that up uh, Monday night in our post game recap of the national championship game, and they asked me the question of Ohio State obviously opens up as the betting favorite for next year, right?
Right.
And what do you think about that? I'm like, well, I would have a hard time picking Ohio State or Notre Dame to get back to this game next year. Because think about it. You have a team, let's say like Florida State, whose season ended late November. They started their off-season workouts yesterday. So which means they're going to have a full off season of rest. They had a good rest for their bodies, a good month. Now they get to start to winter workouts. Then you have to go into spring practice, and we get 15 practices. If you are Notre Dame or Ohio State, you're just ending your season. So your winter workouts may be truncated. You got to give these dudes at least a month off of their bodies to get to relax. And then you may have a shortened, spring. So you're going to get out to a slow start. And for your question about the All-Star games, think about this. If you are Ohio State, Notre Dame, or anyone within the final, anybody in the playoff, 12-team playoff, it's hard for me to see you participate in an all-star game because they start first week of January, so you're still playing college ball. And when you're done, you maybe if you get eliminated in round one, you still have a chance to go to at least two or three. No, you're not going. You need rest. In fact, at the even at the small school level, um, at the College Gridiron Showcase, which was in Fort Worth, Texas, which is near Frisco, Texas, which is where the FCS championship game was or is. And we saw North Dakota State and Montana State play a great game that I would say the Sunday night or a Monday night. And next thing we saw two North Dakota State offensive linemen who had fantastic. The right tackle for North Dakota State was outstanding. Um, in the College Gridiron Showcase practice. And at the end of the showcase, there's a scrimmage. He opted out of playing in the scrimmage. He was like, and the reason was given was body needs rest. So he had just came off a 15 game season, to your point, got to All Star game, got one good day of practice, and it was like, I just need to get ready for the off season. Because also when you think about that, this other part of the great point you brought up, if you are training for the combine, the training for these guys starts as soon as that season ends, maybe like mid-December. They're already into their training program, trying to get faster, stronger, more explosive, and for a 2 month stretch where they're going to go to the combine. So we're going to probably see less guys that at least those 12 from those 12 teams that participate in the postseason participate in the combine workouts or anything combine related outside of interviews, and damn sure not going to go into a pro day and try to compete too. Because again, your body needs rest. So it'll be fascinating to see how much scouts rely on the tape and interviews, because there's going to be a lot of tape when you think
Right.
about these guys have played 5, 6, in some cases 7 years of college football. So we kind
Mhm.
of know what you can do.
Right.
Maybe that kind of changes things, or college football is going to have to start the season earlier and
And
trim something to where they can finish at a reasonable time.
yeah, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I've been thinking about the combine, for example, and these kids that just went through the college football playoff. As you said, there are teams that ended their season in November, which means some of these kids have been at training facilities doing track drills for the combine since the middle of December. This a kid that just came out of Ohio State or Notre Dame that might start combine training 3 weeks from now
Right.
isn't going to be ready to put up the number that he would have been capable of putting up, in some of these in the 40-yard dash or these agility drills that he would have if he had been training for 4 months instead of 3 weeks.
Think about a
So
guy that's a potential top 5 pick, Abdul Carter, who played a
mhm.
great postseason. He had a hurt shoulder. Like, he's not gonna bench press at the combine, probably not gonna jump, so
Why would he do anything?
why would he do anything? Like, he played hurt in what,
He
January 13th. You know what I'm
he
saying?
had he had what, 14 or 15 games to show you everything you need to know.
Bingo. So that affects not only just the lower end guys that's trying to make the roster that will probably end up being forced to go out there and compete in the combine, but these high end guys as well.
Absolutely. Em, I gotta let's finish up here. I've got to ask. I know your your yearly draft guide is probably in progress right now. How many guys did you have in last year?
I want to say last year we finished out because a lot of guys went back. We finished out around 950, which was shocking because the previous three. This is the sixth year I've put out the draft guide, and last year was the first one we dipped under 1,000. But
I
everyone,
was gonna say you're slacking less than
yeah,
1,000.
less
Come
than 1,000. But
on.
this year we gonna have probably over 1,000, and there's a bonus, some bonus reports in there as well. That's gonna, kind of always give folks the reason to come back and get the best draft guide out there because we give you more of what you're paying for as opposed to stuff that you don't really need.
How many you got written at this point, Em?
I will tell you this. I just started receivers 2 days ago, and we're already at so think about it, quarterbacks and running backs. So we're already at three something.
Wow.
So, and I saw as I have to create the templates for receivers, there's probably going to be close to 200 receivers.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's a lot. And so I'm excited about it because this is really where you focus. It helps me for the whole season, not only just for the draft, but also for the NFL season. Um, and then, so this is a
Well,
fun process.
yeah, your guide is always the one that I go digging through as soon as undrafted free agent time comes around, and even with day 3, because, you know, your guide's the only one that goes that far. Your guide is the only one that's got full reports on, most guides, even the fantastic guide that Dane Brugler of The Athletic does, lists 400 guys, 450 guys. Then it just has a list of undrafted guy, undrafted guy, undrafted guy. You have full reports on all of those guys. And so I always go look at your guide for, I never heard of that dude, but I'm sure Emory has.
I appreciate that. That's what I want, and you've been a loyal subscriber to the guide, and you've been able to say like, man, at least I know something going into a practice about Jordan Riley, right?
Right,
Like someone like that, just like, man, who the hell is doing this? The Giants drafted. Okay, at least I know something, and it's quick
right.
to the point, easy to read, easy to digest, and gives you just what you need to know.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be looking forward to it. And, maybe one of these days you'll give it to me for free.
Hey man, we
Yeah.
got to make money, man. That's a lot of
I
man
know.
hours.
I know, and I don't mind paying for it. So
No, I appreciate that
anyway,
support. Man,
anyway, appreciate it. Can people pre-order at this point?
that's what I was gonna say. They can go to footballgameplan.com/2025 draft guide.
All right. Thank you much. We'll be looking forward to when that comes out. And Giants fans, thank you as always for watching. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.